Let's return now to this Newspoll. It's the first major survey in the wake of the government's tax backflip. Let's bring in Tom Connell. And Tom, a snapshot first of all for the Albanese government. They'd be largely quite sanguine, happy about where things are right now?
I think relatively happy. Look, a lot's happened since the last poll, so maybe things were briefly worse before they got better. Let's take a look at those numbers. Remember last year, of course, we saw the Albanese government end in a slight improvement. So improved a little bit off that. Primary vote up 34%, up 1%, which they've taken off the Greens. So not a lot of movement here. The coalition slightly ahead, but we know Labor get a lot of help from Greens in that 2PP. So having a look at two-party preferred, and that is the same as it was at the end of last year, 52 compared to 50. But it's worth noting that it was only in November it was back to 50-50 after October. Look, from October to November, support crashed for the Albanese government. They restored the 52 last year, and that holds here. So I think they'll be relatively happy at 52-48. There is always this question of what sort of trust cost there was with these tax changes, Anthony Albanese. And this will be a little bit of a concern because you saw his performance, even late last year, just before that referendum, was still a net positive, +3, neutral in October, again, crashed down to -13 in November, steadied somewhat in December, but in this poll, it's gone back by another 1, so -9%. He'd want that to be better, but he knows it's a long path ahead. But yeah, that will be the more worrying aspect, his performance and how that's being viewed at the moment by voters.
And voters were asked what they make of the tax changes. It's running Labor's way, but it's lukewarm in terms of what voters perceive as the benefit they're going to receive.
Yeah, which is quite interesting, isn't it, given how much Labor thinks the numbers are in their favour here. So let's look at some of the really specific reaction to these tax changes. Better off 38%, worse off 18%. So that's much higher, but about the same at 37%, and then don't know at 7%. So you've actually, while Labor's talking up an 84% better off, only 38% of voters at the moment agree on that specific aspect. When we keep going through some of this voter reaction as well, and we break down how much better off, this is interesting too. Much better, 7%, only a little better, 31%. So a lot of people are saying, this might be my extra $15 a week. I'm better off, but it's not a big difference. 37% about the same, which we said is a lot bigger than perhaps it would be, that Labor would hope it would be. Look, the good news for them, only 9%, a little worse, and 9% much worse off, 7% still in the don't know. It does tell you that this is still contested territory. Yes, there are numbers on this, but it's still how voters feel in terms of how much better off they'll be that make a difference. What about what they think in terms of this decision, whether or not this was the right call, if you like? So, good call, bad call. 84% believe this is Labor voters, I should say. The other graphic disappeared on me, so I'll work with what I've got. 84% of voters say it was the right thing to do. In terms of Labor voters, only 7% are talking about whether they should have kept their promise or not. When we look at Greens voters, similar numbers. What might be a bit more interesting about this, so when we look at Greens voters and bring them up, is we do have more Greens voters saying they're not actually sure if it was a good call. Look, it's 15%. I'm not sure if we've got a bit of an issue here. There's 15%. And it is worth noting, there are a lot of younger Greens voters that rent, but some of the Greens voters are quite wealthy in some of these seats. So, 7 up to 15, maybe a few of them not getting their tax cut. Coalition voters was an interesting one as well, Kieran. I think this is quite interesting because, again, 41% are saying it's the right thing to do versus 53% saying they should have kept their promise. I think that number might surprise some people. Why is that not higher, given these are coalition voters that would be naturally set up to vote for the coalition? And 41%, not too far off half, think it was the right thing to do to change the tax cut.
So a bit of a contradiction here. What do you make of what these numbers suggest about how the change has gone down, Tom?
I think there's a direct contradiction, which we can set up really well here to explain why people here are perhaps thinking this is the right thing, even though it might not necessarily benefit them. So 38% say they're better off financially, but 62% say Labor did the right thing. This is an interesting gap because you'd think if people think it's the right thing to do, more of them would be recognising they're better off financially. Seemingly, it's not so much the case. I think the coalition voters are an interesting part of this. So let's bring up, for example, what's happening in terms of some of the reaction to this. So this is coalition reaction only, coalition supporters. 53% are saying the government should have kept their promise. Now, you would think that would be higher. Why am I saying that? Well, 28% saying they're worse off, 41% say they're about the same. You would think the vast majority of this, nearly 70% of people would say, this is not a good decision. Labor should have kept their promise, and yet it's only at 53. What else is going into that? Well, how will this actually be received when the tax cut's going out? I want to highlight something here. There's the difference in terms of Labor versus the coalition, and then there's the overall. So let's take someone on 20K. They're getting $1 under Labor, and that's all they're getting. When we come out here to $70,000, overall they're getting $26, nearly $27 a week in their pay packet, only $15 a week difference. So what will they think come July? Will they think, great, I'm getting a $27 tax cut, all because of Labor? That's possible. They might think, oh, here's my $15 difference. Are voters really doing the difference? I don't think many do. So the question is, can Labor get credit for the whole tax cut and make these people think, great, I got $27 only because of Anthony Albanese? And then you can play that out here. Are people on 135,000? Are they saying, here's the difference I'm getting, $15, or here's what I'm getting, $71? And that's more extreme down the 145,000. You might have some coalition voters saying, I'm getting a $70 per week tax cut, rather than, oh, here's the difference, I'm getting $2, because this tax cut hasn't actually landed yet. So I think a lot more will be thinking about that overall amount if Labor can win the day on the tax debate.